Have you ever noticed how the people sent to break you never leave the same? They arrive carrying confidence, hidden agendas, and carefully rehearsed lies, convinced they're about to expose your weakness. But something goes terribly wrong. The longer they watch you survive chaos, silence, betrayal, and pain, the more their certainty begins to crack. They expected a victim. They found a force they couldn't explain. They came searching for your secrets but ended up confronting their own emptiness. Some missions don't fail because of bad planning. They fail because the target awakens something impossible to ignore. And once that happens, nothing stays under control. The first thing they stole wasn't your privacy. It was your illusion of safety. Long before you realized something felt wrong, someone had already been studying your routines, your reactions, your moments of weakness. Every smile you gave, every silence you kept, every painful chapter you buried was quietly being observed. They believed that if they watched long enough, they would eventually discover the fracture that would make you collapse. To them, you weren't a person. You were a project, a psychological puzzle waiting to be solved, a target whose mind could be mapped, predicted, and ultimately controlled. The mission was simple. Enter your world unnoticed. Earn your trust without earning your respect. Listen more than speak. Blend into your daily life until your guard naturally fell. They weren't sent to celebrate your victories or comfort your struggles. They were sent to identify patterns, expose vulnerabilities, and collect every detail that could someday be turned against you. Every conversation became intelligence. Every emotional reaction became data. Every setback became another note in a report that someone, somewhere, was expecting to read. They had already written the ending before the story even began. In their minds, you would eventually reveal yourself to be like everyone else. You would complain when life became difficult. You would betray your principles for temporary comfort. You would panic when pressure increased. You would seek approval when rejected. You would become predictable. That's what they had been trained to expect, because most people eventually surrender to fear. Fear has a rhythm. It follows familiar patterns. Most minds can be decoded once enough pressure is applied, so they came prepared. They memorized your habits. They learned what made you laugh. They searched for your insecurities. They paid attention to the people you trusted, the dreams you rarely spoke about, and the wounds you tried to hide beneath confidence. They believed every human being has a breaking point. Their only responsibility was finding yours before anyone else did. But something immediately disrupted the mission. You didn't react the way normal people react. When life disappointed you, you became quieter instead of louder. When people abandoned you, you became stronger instead of desperate. When betrayal arrived, you didn't spend your energy chasing explanations. You spent it rebuilding yourself. Every crisis that should have weakened your spirit somehow sharpened your discipline. The spy couldn't understand it. Their instructions had never mentioned someone who transformed pain into fuel. Every psychological model they relied on assumed repeated hardship would create bitterness, resentment, or surrender. Yet every difficult season seemed to produce a calmer version of you. You weren't pretending to be fearless. You had simply stopped negotiating with fear. That was the first unexpected observation. Then came another. You weren't obsessed with proving people wrong. You were obsessed with proving yourself right. While others chased validation, you chased growth. While people around you argued over opinions, you invested your energy in becoming someone your future self would respect. The spy kept waiting for arrogance to appear, but found humility. They waited for selfish ambition, but discovered quiet purpose. That wasn't supposed to happen. Their reports slowly became more complicated. Instead of documenting weaknesses, they found contradictions. They expected emotional instability, but witnessed emotional control. They searched for insecurity, but found self-awareness. They expected revenge after betrayal, but saw restraint. They searched for dependency, but discovered independence. None of it matched the profile they had been given. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. The closer they got to your life, the less certain they became about everything they believed before meeting you. They realized your greatest strength wasn't intelligence, talent, popularity, or luck. It was consistency. You continued showing up when nobody noticed. You continued improving when nobody applauded. You continued choosing discipline when excuses would have been easier. That kind of behavior creates something difficult to manipulate because manipulation depends on emotional predictability. Someone who governs themselves is far harder to control than someone who is ruled by impulse. The mission quietly shifted without permission. Instead of collecting evidence against you, they found themselves studying your habits with genuine curiosity. Instead of asking how to exploit your mindset, they started wondering how someone develops it in the first place. Every assumption they carried into your life began collapsing under the weight of reality. They expected darkness to consume you. Instead, they witnessed someone who walked through darkness without allowing it to define who they became. And that single discovery was far more dangerous than anything they had been sent to uncover. Some people enter your life carrying invisible instructions. They smile at your jokes, nod at your dreams, and ask questions that seem innocent, but behind every conversation is a silent objective. They aren't there to understand you. They're there to measure you. They expect to return with evidence that you are ordinary, emotionally unstable, easily manipulated, or secretly living a lie. They believe that if they observe long enough, the mask will eventually fall. Every person breaks eventually, or so they were taught, but they never imagined they would become the one questioning everything they believed. The mission seemed effortless at first. Watch how you respond when plans fail. Observe what happens when people disappoint you. Record your reactions when life becomes unfair. They believed your true identity would appear only under pressure because pressure exposes what comfort can hide. So they waited for the moment when frustration would strip away your discipline, when betrayal would replace your kindness with hatred, when loneliness would force you to compromise your values. Instead, they witnessed something they had no category for. Every setback that landed on your shoulders became another lesson rather than another excuse. While others wasted weeks blaming circumstances, you quietly adapted. You weren't pretending life was easy. You simply refused to let difficulty become your identity. There was no dramatic announcement, no desperate need for sympathy, no performance designed to impress people. You handled storms the same way mountains handle wind, without asking for permission to remain standing. The observer kept waiting for your breaking point. It never arrived. They watched opportunities disappear from your hands. Yet your determination somehow became stronger. They saw trusted people walk away, expecting your confidence to collapse with them. Instead, you learned to walk alone. They expected rejection to convince you that you weren't enough. But rejection only forced you to discover your own worth without needing applause. That was the first crack in their confidence. The report they planned to write became increasingly confusing. They had expected pages filled with emotional weaknesses, impulsive decisions, hidden fears, and exploitable habits. Instead, they found patience where anger should have existed. They found discipline where chaos should have taken over. They found humility where pride usually grows after success. Nothing made sense anymore. Then they noticed your silence. Most people talk endlessly about what they intend to become. You simply became it. You didn't announce every victory. You didn't seek validation after every accomplishment. You allowed your actions to speak so loudly that explanations became unnecessary. That kind of confidence unsettles people because it cannot be borrowed from public approval. It is built privately, one difficult decision at a time. The observer began paying attention differently. They stopped looking for your flaws and started searching for the source of your strength. Was it intelligence? Not entirely. Was it talent? That couldn't explain everything. Was it luck? Absolutely not. Too many obstacles had stood in your way for luck to deserve the credit. Slowly they realized your greatest advantage was your relationship with pain. Most people fear discomfort because they see it as punishment. You treated discomfort like training. While others escaped difficult conversations, you faced them. While others surrendered when progress slowed, you remained consistent. While others depended on motivation, you relied on discipline. The difference was impossible to ignore. You weren't fearless because life had been kind to you. You were fearless because life had already tested you enough to prove that survival was possible. The observer wasn't supposed to admire you. They were supposed to analyze you, but admiration has a dangerous habit of replacing suspicion when truth becomes impossible to deny. Every day they spent around you challenged another assumption they had carried into the assignment. They expected to expose weakness but found resilience. They expected insecurity but found quiet confidence. They expected someone pretending to be strong, but discovered someone who had earned that strength through countless unseen battles. Something inside them began changing. They started comparing your mindset to their own. They questioned why they avoided challenges while you welcomed growth. They wondered why they needed approval from strangers while you remained focused on your purpose, regardless of who noticed. The assignment had quietly transformed into an education they never requested. Without realizing it, the observer was no longer studying you to complete a mission. They were studying you because your life had become undeniable proof that strength isn't created by perfect circumstances. It is created every time a person refuses to surrender when surrender would have been the easiest choice. There is a terrifying moment in every deception when the hunter realizes the cage was never built for the prey. It was built around their own mind. The shadows they carried into your life begin whispering back at them. Sleep becomes lighter, thoughts become louder. Every lie they rehearsed starts sounding hollow because the person they were sent to dismantle refuses to behave like someone who can be broken. They expected to watch your identity collapse under pressure. Instead, they find their own certainty cracking with every passing day. At first, they dismissed the feeling as temporary confusion. They convinced themselves they were simply spending too much time around you. Professional distance would solve everything, they thought. Emotions had no place in the assignment. Facts mattered. Observations mattered. Results mattered. But facts have a strange habit of becoming uncomfortable when they refuse to support the story someone desperately wants to believe. They reviewed every interaction repeatedly. They searched for signs that your confidence was an act. They waited for the emotional explosion they had predicted from the beginning. They expected to catch you speaking differently behind closed doors than you did in public. They believed everyone eventually exposes a contradiction if watched long enough. Days passed. Nothing. Weeks passed. Still nothing. You weren't perfect. They saw your exhaustion. They noticed moments when disappointment crossed your face. They watched you struggle with uncertainty, difficult decisions, and painful memories. But what disturbed them wasn't the existence of those struggles. It was the way you carried them. You refused to let pain become permission for poor character. You refused to use hardship as an excuse to become cruel, dishonest, or bitter. That was the beginning of their psychological collapse. Every belief they had built their mission upon started falling apart. They had always assumed strength was loud, aggressive, and intimidating, yet your strength was calm. It spoke through patience instead of anger. It answered betrayal with boundaries instead of revenge. It answered failure with discipline instead of excuses. Their mind couldn't process it. They had spent years believing that survival belonged to the most ruthless person in the room. Yet here you were proving that consistency could outlast manipulation, integrity could outlast deception, and quiet confidence could overpower manufactured influence. The conflict inside them became impossible to hide. Every report they attempted to write felt dishonest. If they exaggerated your flaws, they knew they were lying. If they reported the truth, they feared the people who had sent them would question their loyalty. They became trapped between reality and expectation. That is one of the most dangerous places a human mind can exist. Their thoughts followed them everywhere. Conversations replayed inside their head. Small moments they once ignored suddenly carried enormous weight. They remembered how you treated people who could offer you nothing. They remembered the discipline you maintained even when nobody was watching. They remembered opportunities to take shortcuts that you quietly refused. Those memories became evidence, not evidence against you. Evidence against everything they had been taught. For the first time in years, they began questioning themselves instead of questioning someone else. Why did your peace disturb them so deeply? Why did your resilience make their own confidence feel fragile? Why did your silence communicate more power than all the manipulation they had carefully practiced? The questions multiplied faster than the answers. They stopped sleeping well because their mind had become divided. One part remained loyal to the mission. The other part secretly admired the person they were supposed to defeat. Every encounter with you made that internal battle more intense. Then came the realization they feared most. The assignment had changed them. Without intending to, they had started measuring their own life against yours. They noticed how often they acted from fear while you acted from purpose. They realized how much energy they spent maintaining appearances while you invested yours in genuine growth. They understood that pretending to be powerful was exhausting, while actually becoming stronger required honesty, discipline, and relentless self-control. The identity they had carefully protected began falling apart. It wasn't because you attacked them. It wasn't because you exposed them. It happened because your consistency quietly confronted every excuse they had ever made for remaining average. The strange part was that you probably never knew any of this was happening. While they fought invisible battles inside their own mind, you continued living according to your values. You kept improving. You kept learning. You kept moving forward without realizing that your example had become more destructive to deception than any argument ever could. Some victories aren't won through confrontation. Some victories happen when the mere existence of your character becomes impossible for a dishonest mind to ignore, leaving the observer to wrestle with a truth that no amount of manipulation can erase. The most dangerous transformation is the one nobody notices until it is already complete. A mind enters your world armed with suspicion, trained to dissect every weakness, convinced that your downfall is only a matter of time. But somewhere between observing your scars and witnessing your resilience, something inside that observer begins to die. The mission remains the same on paper, yet the person carrying it is no longer the same. They were sent to manipulate your reality. Instead, your reality quietly rewrites theirs. At first, they resist the change. They remind themselves why they came. They replay the instructions in their head like a sacred command. Stay objective, stay detached, never become emotionally involved, never admire the target, never forget the purpose. But those rules become harder to follow every single day because you continue behaving in ways that cannot be explained through manipulation or performance. They expected your kindness to disappear under pressure. It didn't. They expected your discipline to weaken after disappointment. It didn't. They expected your values to collapse the moment nobody was watching. They didn't. That consistency became impossible to ignore. Most people wear masks that eventually slip. They become generous when life is easy and selfish when life becomes difficult. They speak about loyalty until loyalty becomes inconvenient. They preach patience until frustration enters the room. But you carried the same principles into every season. Whether life rewarded you or ignored you, your character remained anchored. The observer had never seen anything like it. Slowly, admiration replaced analysis. Without realizing it, they stopped watching you for evidence of failure and started watching you for lessons. Every difficult decision you made became something they quietly reflected on. Every moment you chose integrity over convenience forced them to compare it with their own choices. The assignment had become personal, not because you exposed them, but because your example exposed the parts of themselves they had spent years hiding. That realization was uncomfortable. It is easier to criticize someone than to become them. It is easier to search for flaws than to admit someone possesses qualities you secretly wish you had. The observer discovered that envy often disguises itself as judgment. What they once called weakness was actually humility. What they once labeled stubbornness was discipline. What they once misunderstood as emotional distance was simply self-respect. Their perspective changed without permission. The conversations they once treated as intelligence gathering now felt meaningful. Your words carried weight because they matched your actions. There was no contradiction to exploit, no double life waiting to be exposed. You weren't trying to convince anyone that you were different. You simply lived differently. That kind of authenticity is unsettling. It cannot be copied overnight. It cannot be manufactured through appearances. It is earned through countless invisible battles that nobody applauds. The observers started questioning their own habits. They noticed how often they sought approval from people who offered nothing valuable in return. They recognized how much energy they wasted maintaining an image instead of building genuine strength. They realized they had mastered the art of appearing confident while quietly living in fear of rejection. You never lectured them. You never tried to inspire them. You never even knew the battle taking place inside their mind. Yet your life became a mirror they could no longer avoid looking into. Soon, they found themselves defending you in conversations where your name was mentioned unfairly. The same person who had entered your life searching for weaknesses now felt uncomfortable listening to lies about your character. They corrected false assumptions. They challenged distorted narratives. They refused to repeat stories they knew weren't true. That was never part of the mission. Respect had replaced suspicion. The strange thing about genuine respect is that it cannot be forced. It grows quietly, built from repeated evidence that someone continues choosing the harder path when the easier one would bring faster rewards. The observers saw you lose opportunities because you refused to compromise your values. They watched you remain calm while others reacted emotionally. They witnessed you recover from disappointment without allowing it to poison your spirit. Those moments left permanent marks on their thinking. Eventually, they stopped asking how they could influence you and started asking how they could transform themselves. Your resilience had become contagious. Your discipline had become undeniable. Your quiet confidence had become a standard against which they measured their own life. The assignment that began with deception had unknowingly evolved into admiration, because nothing reshapes a searching mind more completely than encountering a person whose character remains unshaken, even when darkness surrounds every step they take. The darkest truth is never the one hidden from the target. It is the one hidden from those giving the orders. They sit behind closed doors, believing every move is under control, convinced that information is power and loyalty can never be questioned. They expect another ordinary report filled with weaknesses, predictable behaviors, and exploitable patterns. They have already imagined the conclusion before the first page is even opened. But sometimes the greatest threat to a carefully designed plan isn't the person being watched. It's the person who comes back, unable to lie about what they witnessed. The final meeting arrives in silence. Questions are asked with absolute confidence. Did they break? Did they lose control? Did they expose their fears? Did they become vulnerable? The room waits for simple answers. Instead, the messenger hesitates. That hesitation says more than an entire report ever could. They open the file expecting evidence that your confidence was an illusion. They expect stories proving your discipline eventually collapsed, your principles were abandoned, or your resilience was nothing more than an act performed for the world. They are prepared to celebrate another successful mission, but the pages refuse to cooperate. Every observation points toward the opposite conclusion. The report explains that pressure did not weaken you. It refined you. Isolation did not destroy you. It strengthened your independence. Betrayal did not make you cruel. It made you wiser about where to invest your trust. Failure did not convince you to quit. It forced you to improve until quitting was no longer an option. The people reading the report become visibly uncomfortable. This wasn't the outcome they invested in. They search for contradictions. There must be hidden flaws. There must be emotional instability somewhere beneath the surface. Nobody survives repeated storms without eventually falling apart. So they ask again, "What aren't you telling us?" The messenger takes a slow breath because the hardest part has not yet been spoken. The greatest discovery wasn't your strength. It was the unexpected transformation of the observer. The assignment had quietly changed them. Every week spent studying your decisions forced them to question their own excuses. Every obstacle you overcame exposed how easily they surrendered when life became inconvenient. They expected to return with leverage over your mind. Instead, they returned carrying uncomfortable questions about their own character. The room grows colder. That is unacceptable. Observers are not supposed to become students. Agents are not supposed to admire their assignments. People sent to influence others are never expected to return influence themselves. Yet that is exactly what happened. The report explains how your consistency shattered every prediction. You never claimed to be fearless, yet fear never controlled your actions. You never announced your discipline, yet it appeared in every routine. You never demanded respect, yet respect naturally followed because your actions carried a weight that words alone could never create. Some in the room reject the report immediately. It can't be true. Others remain silent because deep down they recognize honesty when they hear it. The messenger continues anyway. They describe watching you remain calm while others chased chaos. They explain how you treated strangers with dignity, even when nobody could reward you for it. They admit that every attempt to predict your reactions failed because your decisions were guided by principles instead of emotion. That single realization changes everything. A person driven by impulse can be manipulated. A person driven by purpose becomes incredibly difficult to control. The room no longer discusses your weaknesses. They begin discussing your influence. Without realizing it, you had become something far more dangerous than anyone expected. Not because you possessed extraordinary power, wealth, or status, but because your example quietly disrupted the thinking of everyone who came close enough to observe it. That kind of influence spreads without permission. It doesn't require speeches. It doesn't depend on popularity. It grows through repeated evidence that integrity still exists in a world addicted to shortcuts. The messenger closes the report knowing the mission technically failed, but something far greater had been uncovered. They had searched for evidence that you could be defeated and returned with undeniable proof that your greatest weapon was never force, manipulation, or revenge. It was the quiet ability to remain the same person through success. Failure, praise, rejection, comfort, and suffering until even those sent to expose your weaknesses could no longer deny the strength they had witnessed with their own eyes. The most unsettling victory is the one your enemies never realize they've handed you. They spend months building strategies, recruiting people, collecting information, and calculating every possible outcome. They believe victory belongs to the side with the better plan. But there is one thing no strategy can predict: a soul that refuses to become what suffering demanded it should become. While they were preparing to defeat you, they were unknowingly creating the evidence that your character could never be bought, broken, or borrowed. You never declared war. You never chased revenge. You never wasted nights plotting the downfall of those who wished to see yours. That confused everyone. The world has conditioned people to believe strength is loud. They expect power to arrive with threats, intimidation, and endless arguments. They assume that the strongest person in the room is the one capable of causing the most destruction. But you discovered something far more dangerous. Real strength doesn't scream for attention. It quietly survives every attack until the attackers begin questioning themselves. The people watching your life waited for anger to consume you. It never happened. They expected bitterness to poison your heart. It never did. They believed betrayal would transform you into someone unrecognizable. Instead, it transformed you into someone wiser. Every painful experience became another brick in the foundation of your identity. While others allowed disappointment to rewrite their values, you allowed it to sharpen your perspective. You stopped expecting fairness from the world and started expecting greatness from yourself. That single decision separated you from the majority. Because ordinary people react, extraordinary people respond. There is a difference. Reaction is controlled by emotion. Accent is guided by purpose. Every time someone underestimated you, they unknowingly gave you another opportunity to grow without distraction. Every insult became motivation. Every rejection became redirection. Every obstacle became another reminder that comfort has never been the birthplace of greatness. The strange part is that you never asked anyone to notice. You weren't performing resilience for an audience. You were simply becoming the person your circumstances demanded you become. That authenticity carried more weight than any speech ever could. Soon, the people who once doubted you found themselves speaking about you differently. Conversations changed. The same individuals who laughed at your discipline began respecting it. The same people who dismissed your vision began wondering how you stayed committed for so long. Even those who once opposed you could no longer ignore the consistency of your actions. Respect earned through endurance lasts longer than admiration earned through appearances. The greatest irony was impossible to ignore. The person sent to expose your weaknesses became living proof of your strength. Their transformation said everything you never needed to say yourself. You didn't have to defend your character because someone who arrived searching for flaws eventually walked away carrying admiration instead. That is a victory no argument can produce. It cannot be manufactured through clever words or dramatic moments. It is earned quietly over time. Your life became evidence, not evidence that you were perfect, evidence that you were genuine. People trust consistency more than perfection because perfection often feels artificial. Consistency feels human. They saw you make mistakes without abandoning your principles. They watched you experience loss without abandoning your hope. They witnessed disappointment without watching you surrender your discipline. That combination is rare. The observer eventually understood that your greatest influence wasn't found in what you said. It was found in what you repeatedly did. Your habits became louder than promises. Your patience became louder than anger. Your integrity became louder than manipulation. Without realizing it, you proved one timeless truth: character is contagious, not because people are forced to imitate it, but because authentic strength exposes how exhausting it is to keep pretending. Some continued resisting the lesson, others quietly embraced it, but nobody who truly encountered your resilience walked away unchanged. In the end, there were no trophies to lift, no crowds applauding your name, and no dramatic declaration that you had won. The victory existed in something far deeper. You remained faithful to your values when abandoning them would have been easier. You protected your peace without becoming cold. You carried your scars without allowing them to become excuses. And somewhere along the way, the very mission designed to uncover your weakness became the strongest testimony to your resilience, proving that the most powerful revenge is not retaliation at all. It is becoming so deeply rooted in purpose, discipline, and integrity that even those sent to defeat you leave carrying pieces of the strength they once believed they were assigned to destroy.